Welcome to the WakeUp Protocol. I am your host, Nadja Haldimann, and together we're having life-changing conversations with real people about spiritual awakening and the transformations that follow. We're mapping the messy path of awakening so you can go further faster and feel a little less alone along the way. Today's guest is Justin Maguire III, a thought leader in product and software design and the current head of design at Atlassian. But Justin is far more than his title. He's also an athlete, a sailor, an artist, and a designer whose multidimensional life has given him a rare perspective on living with presence, purpose, and passion. In our conversation, Justin opens up about what he calls the deep now, from sailing 6 months out of the year in places like Glacier Bay and the Sea of Cortez, to finding flow through elite triathlons, to reimagining what it means to design corporate cultures that are truly human. His story is about listening inward, honoring your values, and finding freedom in unexpected places. We can't wait for you to experience this conversation with Justin Maguire.
Sailing is the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And that's one of those things that if you talk to seasoned sailors, they'll say that. And I could have spouted off that axiom, but in the last year, we were down in Magdalena Bay on the peninsula on the Pacific side as we were going around. And I woke up in the morning and someone had stolen our dinghy, cut the line and stolen our dinghy in the night. And we were all sitting in the cockpit, feeling all the feels, right? Violated and all those things. And then a pair of gray whales surfaced 10 feet off the back of the boat at sunrise in front of us. And you're in this moment, it's like, oh my God, you go from here to here. And it was maybe the most profound moment of that in a ridiculously compressed time space of just this unbelievable moment of commune with nature and a reminder to not focus on the lows.
Justin Maguire, welcome to the WakeUp Protocol.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Hello, Justin. I'm very excited to have you here today. Before we get started, I have a question. What's your life like right now?
It's the best it's ever been. I'm happier. I think sometimes people talk about, I wish I was in my pick some earlier time, 30s, 20s, whatever. And I wouldn't go back to any of it. I'm happier now than I've ever been.
Right before we jumped on, you were talking about living on a sailboat for half the year and then you just got back. What was that trip like?
It's been amazing. This last year, I spent 6 months out of the 12 on the boat. We actually spent 3 months going up the Inside Passage to Glacier Bay in Alaska and back. And then we were home for 6 months. It was 3 months, 6 months at home. And then we went down into the Sea of Cortez for 3 months. And yeah, like with any tragedy, I guess I would say darkness was always followed by light. And maybe the good thing to come out of COVID was a realization that what you do and how you do it and the value of that isn't tied to you being in an office. Starlink is an amazing thing.
Oh, wow. So did you buy the sailboat after COVID or kind of had this realization?
Yeah, I got the sailboat. I've had a previous one, but I got this boat and it larger and was Starlink and with much more the intention to actually do this as opposed to just weekend sailing after COVID.
Wow, that's incredible. Is it like a pretty big sailboat? Like I know absolutely nothing about sailing. So I'm like, yeah.
It's a catamaran. I had a very nice monohull, what you might think of as a traditional sailboat, but I have a big booming voice, those who know me. And my partner is a therapist and she's like, why are you waiting till you retire to do this? Starlink works. We both have jobs we can do from anywhere. But your big voice, I need quiet for my patients. We need a catamaran so that you can be in one hull working and I can be the other.
What a brilliant idea. You have a 2-bedroom apartment on the water that takes you around the world.
That's right.
Fun. Oh my God, that's amazing. So I know a lot of things have happened in order for you to get to that point. You said COVID was one of the things, and there have been other moments in the past. So my question to you right now is, if you had to define spiritual awakening or whatever you want to call that, how would you define that?
For me, it's making the space to really tune into and listen to yourself. Your body, your heart, your mind will lead you where you need to be. but often we run fast, run loud, run listening outward. And I think it's sometimes with intention, sometimes through circumstance or happenstance that you find yourself in situations where you're like, oh, what's going on in here? And learning to listen to that, I think for me anyway, has been where all of that has come from.
Learning to listen to your inner voice, to your body, and allowing that to guide you. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you're approaching that?
Oh man, that's been a journey, right? Nadja, you've known me for a long time. And I'm an ADD poster child. I was an early test case for Ritalin. I tend to run fast, and I have the version of that is, it's not that I can't focus. It's actually, if I'm interested in something, I can focus to the exclusion of all else, including my own inner voice. And I've reflected back earlier, like I would say right out of college, maybe 2 years out of college, I was visiting some friends back at Carnegie Mellon, my alma mater, and during the summer. We decided to take mushrooms. The first time I'd ever done that. We went for a walk through the park for 5 hours. And that was the first time I'd never known peace. And my takeaway from that was, oh, that's in me. I'm not somehow making the space for that, but it's not like that's a part of me, right? I just have to make the space for that to express itself. And I think I knew that very quickly. I reflected upon that very quickly, and then promptly forgot about it. And, took a longer time, like many other things, to come back to other signals of moments like that, to start to really cue in like, oh no, not only is it in me, it's a thing I need to listen. I need to tune into that. I need to find that in myself. And there are many ways. Sports is another of those.
It's really fascinating that you're talking about magic mushrooms. For me, that was my personal first awakening experience too. They just put me into a place that I didn't know possible. And all of a sudden I found an inner peace and an inner groundedness that I knew is real, but I had absolutely no idea it existed until that very moment. How old were you at the time?
23, maybe 22.
Yeah.
It would have been 22 because I wasn't legal to drink when I graduated college.
If you think about that age of 22, 23, and then that next moment where you found yourself in a similar place. So you talked about ADD, being able to hyper-focus on things and then really tuning out the rest of yourself, almost kind of a disconnect between the mind and the body, and maybe even your true self, the higher self, and the doing version of yourself. So at what point did you reconnect those in a more meaningful way?
That actually came from sport. I triathlons, Ironmans at an elite level for many years, and you knew me during that time for sure. But for me, that was never about competitiveness with others. Like, one of the things I loved about the sport is it's you versus you in every way. It's you versus your demons, your whatever. It's the square foot of your head that is defining how you'll do on a race day, right? It has nothing to do with other people. And there are hours and hours and hours spent bicycle. And what I found is that my chemistry, my brain, having that singular point of focus, it's like enough of the monkeys in my brain had to focus on working at like tuning into that it actually, although physically exhausting, was almost a meditative state for me mentally. That quietness then was really present for me. And of course, you're really tuned into your body. You're deeply present with how you feel, how you're breathing. And so then within that, there are too many moments to count. Biking up the backside of Mount Rainier on a cool fall afternoon and coming up to the fog, and I couldn't see 4 feet in front of me. And all of a sudden I hear this clippity-clop, clippity-clop, clippity-clop. And out of the fog, literally next to me came a deer, and it just paced me for about 10 minutes beside me. And all it was the sound of my breath and its breath. Or swimming out into the bay in Kailua in Hawaii at sunrise and finding myself in a pod of dolphins for 30 minutes swimming. you're working out, but that's actually not the focus at all. You're so incredibly tuned into yourself and your relationship to nature. And there are so many moments like that to count.
That's so powerful. And so much of that resonates with me too. I played sports or had my first, I don't know, awakening, I guess, but an experience of this kind of flow state where there's no mind. There's no mind at all. And you're just totally immersed in what's happening without having to analyze anything. It's just kind of dropping into this space. It's super fascinating. I love that. As you were running, you experienced this kind of merge with just the environment around you. It's beautiful.
Yeah. I eventually had to stop. If you were to see me, I'm, at race weight, I was 6'1", 200 pounds at 6% body fat. At 200 pounds, there's actually a whole other category in triathlon called Clydesdale.
Yeah.
Because most of the guys you race with are like, little 120 pound guys. And so I don't look like a runner, but it was incredibly Zen-like for me. And when my back got injured from all of that, right? My L5S1 disc basically gave out and I had to stop. That was an incredibly hard year because I went much, much deeper into understanding the ways in which that activity was a spiritual, emotional activity for me. And because I lost it, and suddenly that whole outlet, that whole way of connecting to myself and the world was just gone, was off the table.
Yeah.
And it took me a year to recalibrate and try to figure out what was going on. And my chemistry was all out of whack as a result. And what are the new ways in which I'm going to have to find that? I have to find other avenues for that.
Yeah. I experienced a career-ending injury. I mean, I didn't play collegiately, but that was the path. That's where I was going to go. I wanted to play baseball in college, but I hurt my back and it was done. I wasn't the same after that. And so I experienced that kind of collapse of that dream. And for me, I had this horrible identity crisis, which lasted longer than a year, at least for me. I'm curious, did you experience that at all too? Like having a kind of...
It's funny. Nadja will laugh to hear me say this because I think everyone would say this was not true, but it actually, my identity was never as a triathlete or an athlete. I mean, it was such a big part of my life that everyone who saw me would have assumed it was. There were very few other athletes I hung out with because I found them to be the most one-dimensional humans. It's like the only thing they could talk about. It was the only interest they had, right? And I was a photographer and a woodworker and a sailor and a designer. And, I just had a whole variety of other things that were of interest, and that I would describe an athlete was one small part of the collage of my identity.
Yeah.
And because I couldn't do it anymore, didn't mean like that piece of my collage is still there. It will always be there. There just were other dimensions.
I've known you for a long time, and you were definitely very much of an athlete, although I probably would not have just called you an athlete because you were everything else too, a designer and doing so many other projects. You were just a completely creative human being that was also an extraordinarily fit body at the time. You went through this experience that the triathlons really allowed you to get into that flow state. And it was a way for you to be in that moment of whatever you want to call it, awakening, flow, being in the moment. And a lot of people describe being spiritually awake, being in the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
So that happened for you. And at the same time, it was probably, the way I'm seeing it, just a one-dimensional way of having access into that. Whereas in reality, there is like so much more to spiritual awakening, right? It's like,
yes.
Oh, I found a hack and I'm going to continue doing this because it's working for me. And then something happened and it said, actually, there's more to it. You're going to have to figure out different and new ways to do that. And so I'm curious, what happened after that injury and how did you manage to not become a victim of that, but rise up within that and then see where it's going to take you to continue growing as a soul in this lifetime?
I love that. It was the hack that I had found. And so by virtue of having had it, I hadn't explored other ways to arrive at that. That year after of going, wait, whoa, what's like, well, was, I think that was its own opening because I didn't have that hack. I couldn't just go back to that. Right. So, and I know another vector for that. I had avoided, I had avoided Burning Man for a very, very long time because my experience of it from the people I knew was just sort of Studio 54 party scene, Instagram glamour model poses. And I just, my playa name is Sparkle Pony. Like I just couldn't deal. Like all of it was just like, oh my God. But a friend of mine, one of my best friends, he's my maker partner in the world. Like we're right and left hand in building and making things. He called me and he said, hey, I've been working on a piece. I've been working on this piece with a guy named Mark Cochran for a year, and you dragged me to every race on the earth to support you for a decade. I did this thing. I want you to come out to the desert and help me build this. And I was like, you're right. I owe you that. And so I went, and what I'm so grateful for is that it brought me into the art scene at Burning Man. Right? It wasn't like just go have a party. It was with purpose and giving back and going out and meeting all of these other creative artists and getting to build for a week in the desert. And that vector I think it opened me up to the value of setting aside very intentional time, being a little bit undirected, going without purpose allows for discovery. And then allowing myself to showing up with curiosity towards people that I probably had a predisposed idea of who they were. And instead of doing that, just showing up completely open myself to the possibility of who someone might be and what any connection with another might bring. And that was really, really powerful. And I'm so grateful. I've gone back 5 times and I've always gone and built. I've actually never stayed the whole burn. Usually I can't take that much time away, but going out for a week or two before to build. And then I usually stay for a couple of days to party and then hang out with people and then go. But that's been really meaningful. And there's just so many different perspectives. I think we're a product of our environment. And if you don't expand the notion of what your environment is, you're restricting yourself and your own personal growth.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you're mentioning Burning Man and also the way you prefaced it by the assumptions you had about Burning Man and what it really truly was for you. As you know, I've been to Burning Man several times too, as a matter of fact. The reason why I ended up leaving the corporation where we both worked together was because of Burning Man, because I saw a different reality and I could no longer bring the two realities together. The reality I knew was possible and for me at the time, restricted reality in a corporation just didn't work for me anymore. So for me, it was a huge shift. And you were able to stay in your corporate environment. I think you might have gone in and out of it a couple of times, but you're still in it and you're actually thriving in it. You have an executive high profile position in design. How did you consolidate the two and make that work? Because it's something I was not able to do. I couldn't put the two back together in a cohesive life. So I'm really curious what you did to make that work. I'm really wanting to have our listeners hear that too, because this is something that I don't have an answer to. And I wish more people could bring the two together, to bring both the creative, awakened world and the corporate world where you can make a really good amount of money to support your lifestyle and then live the freedom that you really want to live.
That's a great question. My dad is both a designer and an artist. And I would always say the difference, because people will say, oh, you're such an artist, Justin. I'm like, no, I'm not. And they would say, you are. And no, to me, an artist is someone who has an intrinsic inner need to create. There's not a brief, right? It just must create. Where a designer for me is someone who is using creativity in the service of a defined problem. Mm-hmm. And I think as a creative, as a designer, some of my ability to stay in there is because I've moved up for reasons I don't myself quite understand. But the reason that allowed me to stay in is because it changed the framing of what I was designing. If I was still working on like, should the radius of this button be whatever, I would lose my mind at my age, right? There was a time that was interesting. Now it's not that time. And a reframe for me in my career was thinking that the design problem fundamentally was about the design of a team and an organization. It's like defining a culture. And if you get that right, sort of all the rest will follow, right? Mm-hmm. And that problem, designing in a way social structures and rhythms and norms and culture and designing on teams, like, handpicking, like this personality and this personality combined with these two personalities make something greater than the sum of their parts. And that design problem was, for me, quite interesting. And that allowed me to continue, reframe the whole sort of sense of purpose of what I was interested in. And fortunately, there was a job for what I was interested in. That's not always the case. Sometimes when you reframe and you find what holds your intrigue, what holds your intellectual locus of focus is, it's somewhere else is going to pay you money for that. But I've been fortunate that those were congruent for me.
I'm really, really glad you're explaining that you too were not necessarily able to continue holding the profession that you were doing. You needed something bigger. You needed something that felt more meaningful to you, more in alignment with purpose. We're now designing culture. And that is a whole different level of doing work. Like, at the time, I could no longer do what's the radius of a button anymore either as a UX designer. So I needed to find something more meaningful. And I just went out on my own and started working with startups and started helping them get off the ground. And again, it was designing the whole culture there too. So in a sense, we did a really similar things. Now that I'm hearing it, you just did it within the corporate environment. And I went out trying to figure out how I can make it work with little startups and helping them grow and build those cultures and then have more freedom in that way.
You also have to find your tribe. When I left Microsoft, I went to Frog. And then when I left Frog and I was looking for a job, I interviewed and I was more or less offered the chief design officer at Adobe role. But I had something like didn't feel right. And I had this last company, Salesforce, wanted to interview me. And in my head, I'm like, CRM, like that doesn't seem interesting at all. And I don't know. And I went in and had my interview and I came out from that day and I called my partner at the time and I said, I could tell you 10 things that are absolutely crazy about this place, but it's my crazy. These are my people, right? I have found my tribe. I have found my people. And at the end of the day, when I coach people, when people ask me about jobs, I'm like, the first is you have to know your values. For me, I don't want to be a part of making porn or developing products that are about addictive behaviors or commerce where it's about how can I make you spend more money. I don't want to be working on weapons. So to define your value set about what you won't work on. And then within the sphere of what you will, then it's entirely about who you work with. You spend half your life at work. And so if you find that people around you toxic for you or not people you want to spend time and your creative energy with, what are you doing? Like, that sounds awful. Get out.
Yeah. Working with the people that are in alignment with your values. And then within that, you can actually start building something that's meaningful, that you can wake up for every day and spend the majority of your waking life doing and still feel like you're working towards a purpose. A lot of people want to do work that's in alignment with their purpose. How would you define purpose?
Boy, that's a big question. First, whenever I hear that question, I have to say, and I've asked it myself, but I always have a little chuckle inside because I think of the movie The Jerk with Steve Martin. It's like, I found my special purpose. I found my special purpose. Sorry. You've never seen the movie, you'll find the YouTube clip. Purpose is not static. It changes over your life. For some people, it might become more so. But my point is, it's something you need to check in on. You need to make that space to do self-inquiry. And like something I used to say all the time, two of the easiest statements to kind of lob out there and the absolute hardest to self-actualize are love thyself and know thyself. Like if you're honest, there have been times in your life where at least one of those you've not been doing right. And sometimes both. And making the space to really know thyself and love thyself, I think is the on-ramp to knowing what your purpose is.
I love that. To truly love yourself and know yourself and then being honest with yourself from that perspective and then taking steps towards what now feels aligned, not from putting on a mask and pretending to be somebody else.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's really hard. And the world is full of distractions. And sometimes you need to, as the Aussies would say, go on a walkabout to find out what that is. But if you don't know how to answer those two questions, honestly, do you know yourself? Do you love yourself? Man, can't encourage you enough to do everything in your power to give yourself the gift of the space and the time to go answer that, whatever that is. But there's many ways you can approach how to do that. It's not always like quit your job. It doesn't have to involve that, but it is a gift to yourself and you have to give it to yourself.
Yeah. What cultural norms did you have to break to be in a life that you have today?
I don't know if you have to break cultural norms, but what I would say is you're going to break the norms of how people think of you. Your sphere of your relational network has an idea of who Justin is, right? And it's comforting for them to have an idea of who I am. And when I'm like, maybe, well, that's not who I am, and I'm going to go figure out what that is, then suddenly you're outside of the envelope of how they frame you and how they think of you and know you. And that can create a lot of social, relational pressure to stay in that box, right? In the box they framed you in. And I think it's just an act of radical self-love to not care. You just have to not care. Like it's not their job to frame you. It's your job to frame you.
I mean, it sounds like that's something that really came through with your injury and being an athlete and that being so much of your life, not to you, but you were saying in that relational network, people defined you that way or tried to. But what I'm hearing really is that you had a certain flexibility with them, like allowing them, sure, you can say what you want to say, but at the same time, within you still had that space to decide, well, I'm going to go in this direction and people can view me however they want to view me, but I'm going to continue following this kind of thread to find what is mine to do.
I think it's allowed me, I've always had this ability to be deeply in the moment, probably partially because of my ultra focus thing, but being in the moment also means like the capacity to deeply care and love about something and also accepting that you might have to let that go tomorrow, right? Everything dies, as a friend once said to me. Everything, every relationship dies at some point, right? Because someone literally dies or there's an end to all things. And I think it's when we fight that, we stay in relationships to work, to other people, a framed relationship to ourselves. A friend said to me once, everything is for a season, a reason, or for life. And it's when we framed a relationship as a reason, and in fact, it was meant to be a season. Whenever there's an incongruity between what we think it is and what it actually is, it's hard, right? And understanding when you need to persist in something because it's for life, even if you don't yet understand what out there looks like, or when you need to close the chapter on something and it was for a season, or that it's more transactional, it's for a reason, is really important. And that's a lot of like checking in. Why am I doing this? Why am I here? Why? In design research days, we'd say, ask the 5 whys. Ask why 5 times, right?
Yeah. Relationships come and they go. And what I'm really hearing is that releasing attachment to outcome is just a really big part of that, and trusting that there's something bigger on the other side. Am I hearing that right?
I would say yes, and releasing attachments to framings. I would say, Nadja, as I knew you, I think you probably spent about 2 years in a really uncomfortable space because some part of you knew that the framing of who Nadja was in your corporate job was no longer relevant. But you weren't somehow ready to reframe. You couldn't close that chapter. That's hard. And sometimes people stay forever in a thing. You see them, they're massively unhappy. They know they're unhappy. And yet they somehow cannot give themselves the freedom to completely rewrite the notion of self.
Yeah, and you're completely right. I stayed 2 years too long. Those were exactly the 2 years preceding my awakening moment at Burning Man, where my reality and my purpose were no longer in alignment, and I need to find the change. And my programming said, once you are in a job, in a corporation, in a career, you keep going at that, right? That was my old programming. And to let that go and to reframe that and even come to the realization that there is a possibility to actually break out of that and find something completely different, I had to consolidate that within myself. And that took 2 years. And those were painful years. I was just completely confused at the time. Also learned a lot, right? That I was then able to bring into the next chapter and do things differently that made more sense.
And we do that in relationship. I mean, I stayed as someone with strong pleaser tendencies. I stayed in a marriage 3 years too long for all kinds of reasons I shouldn't have. And I knew I shouldn't have. And I think sometimes generally we are brought up to, like, the word selfish is a bad word in society. And it's a spectrum. There's an end of self. It is actually about self-care. Put your own mask on first before you help someone else. Right? And I think sometimes we are the narrative that that's selfish, right? What will people think? This will be disruptive to others. I might fail this thing. And all of those, it's like, no, listen to the self. Listen to the self. You deeply know what you shouldn't be doing, even if you don't know where you should go. Deeply knowing that where you are is not the right one, like, it's very worth listening to.
Yeah. And it's always so interesting how the universe just gives us the no's, but it doesn't directly give us the yeses. It gives us really clear no's. And we know that on an intuitive level. But then it doesn't quite tell us, because that's not working, do that instead. Then it's a bunch of throwing spaghetti at the wall until one of them sticks. Did you find the same thing happening in your life?
For sure. I think the bigger act of courage is stepping off the trail you're on without there being another trail. The reality is you're going to blaze your own trail.
Yeah.
But that's an act of courage. When my first marriage ended, a friend gave me a book. It's like, I don't know, 10 questions to save your marriage or something like that. And the first 9 chapters are great and with no hint. And then you turn the page on the 10th chapter and it was like, have you accepted God in your relationship? Which was like, oh, wait, that was a hard left turn in this book. But one of that was like chapter 3 or something, was go on a first date every year. And I've really thought about this a lot in my life. I'm sure in this conversation, because Nadja and I haven't seen each other in a while, she has an idea of who Justin is. I'm in some frame for her. And when you're in a long-term relationship, whether that's an intimate relationship or a friendship, right? You get to know someone. You have, this person doesn't like mustard and they like this kind of music and whatever. There's like a long written narrative of like all the things about this person that paint a portrait. The problem with portraits is they're static. But humans are not. And once a year, go back and go have that first date where you ask all of the dumb questions over again. Do you still like this? Do you still want to go here in your life? Re-engage, like give yourself and the other person permission to reframe. And that's helped me in my relationship with my father. It's helped me in many contexts to give myself permission to repaint the portrait.
Oh, I really love that. It reminds me of a quote. It's something like, to be married is to witness 1,000 funerals. Back to your point, it's like everything changes the constant. That's really powerful. The portraits are static, not only giving yourself the space to change, but also by doing that, you break your own frame and you also break the frame of the other person. So you allow yourselves to be these forces that are changing and
That's right.
growing and evolving.
And it's hard because there's comfort in having a stable point of reference of who you are and who others are, right? That stable point of reference is a point of comfort. And it can initially be really scary to sort of like, wait, all points are moving. Like, whoa. But ultimately deeply empowering for yourself and for others.
I kind of want to come back to the spiritual awakening conversation a bit. So you've had these different experiences and it definitely changed your life in big ways and got you to the place where you are today. A lot of people talk about how various things in their lives changes once they see life through a different lens, their relationship to people, to their bodies, to foods, to nature, all kinds of things. What would you say happened in your experience? What relationships to the way you're experiencing the world and how you're taking care of yourself have changed?
Several things. I ask more questions of others, of myself, of the world, versus asserting opinions. Through that, I have become more empathetic to the world, people, things, myself. I have learned how to hold space for myself and others' pain without picking it up and carrying it. It's just been a profound lesson. I've learned to tune into a different kind of self-care, feeling into what I need, which was really work. I had a friend who for a long time I would make fun of her because she went through a very intentional phase of this where, I mean, you could ask her, do you want to get ice cream? And she'd stop and go, let me feel into that. And I would be like, oh my God. Like, And then at some point I realized that I was out of tune. And I spent about a year doing that. And I called her and I was like, I can't, damn you. Like, I'm not doing the same ridiculous exercise, but it requires that level of intentionality to retrain 40 years of not feeling into what I need, what I want. I find myself more an activity, which I think I intuitively did, but I do now with more intention. My friend says that I'm an awe hunter. I tend to notice the little, especially the big ones I think everyone sees, the little moments of awe in the world. Awe is, I think we're so good at knowing when something's bad. And my axiom for this, whenever something feels really good, I'll pause and say to the people around me, like, we really need to stop living so poorly. It's my way of sort of jokingly saying, like, right now is awesome. Right? But, because we're really good as humans at being like, right now sucks. But we're really bad at pausing and saying this moment, and even really small, is beautiful.
I wonder if your experiences with sailing, and especially being out in nature, if you just have day after day after day of those things. Not that you have to buy a sailboat and sail around the world to experience that, but I'm curious if you have any that come up from your recent trip.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, sailing is the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And that's one of those things that if you talk to seasoned sailors, they'll say that. And I could have spouted off that axiom, but in the last year, we were down in Magdalena Bay on the peninsula on the Pacific side as we were going around. And I woke up in the morning and someone had stolen our dinghy, cut the line and stolen our dinghy in the night. And we were all sitting in the cockpit, feeling all the feels, right? Violated and all those things. And then a pair of gray whales surfaced 10 feet off the back of the boat at sunrise in front of us. And you're in this moment, it's like, oh my God, you go from here to here. And it was maybe the most profound moment of that in a ridiculously compressed time space of just this unbelievable moment of commune with nature and a reminder to not focus on the lows.
I love how you're explaining how your life shifted in a way that you cultivate more curiosity and you're doing more personal inquiry to really make sure you're truly in alignment with what is true from a real point of view, and how you're celebrating the beautiful moments in your life. And I feel like that is such a beautiful reminder to really focus on that rather than having all these preconceived notions about things. Like, could it be a different way? Cultivating that curiosity and then celebrating what's really going well. I think that's really beautiful. I'm curious, do you have any specific tools that you practice to help you stay in that mindset, in those ways of doing life?
Well, I'm able to swim. So I swim on the regular, and that's very centering. Mm-hmm. Meditation is very hard for me because it's hard for me to sit still. That's why movement-based things are helpful for me. But I actually have been trying in the last year to take 15 minutes every morning where I'm disconnected completely. And I'm literally just tuned into my body every day.
So how do you do that? There's a lot of people who struggle with meditation and sitting still. What works for you?
Just not bringing judgment to it. It's very easy to sit and be like, oh, I'm failing at this, or I'm, there are days where it takes almost the entire time for my brain to quiet. And there's days I can drop in like that. And I think early on, if I couldn't sort of arrive at a quiet space in my brain, I would almost swirl out in self-judgment. But to just allow it's a gift to myself, and every day is different, and just don't attach to any of it. Let it go by. Notice it. There are signals in there. If your brain can't quiet, what's not letting it quiet? That's certainly part of my practice. Taking vacations. I never did that in my career. Or for a lot of years, I would take my 2 weeks where I'd do a 3-day weekend a lot so I could go do a race. But actually taking 2 to 3 weeks off, turn the phone off. I literally will delete all of my work-based applications from my phone. I'm on vacation. That's really, really important.
A change of scenery. And you already mentioned it when you went to Burning Man. It allowed you to see a different reality. And for me too, it's so important to just get out and see something else. Just the other day, I had to drive my dog across the state here in Washington to see an eye doctor. And I haven't been all the way across the state in maybe ever. And I realized there's a desert on the other side of Seattle and it's beautiful. And I just enjoyed taking in the scenery so much. I'm like, wow, I could just do that anytime. I could just take a day or two and just drive somewhere else and then come back and experience something completely different. Well, thank you so much for sharing the tools, for sharing your story and giving us your time. I know you have a lot going on in your life right now. I would like to ask you one last question. If you could go back in time and give a message to a younger version of you, what would you tell him?
It's okay to be angry. I was taught that anger was a bad thing. And I think for many, many years that I put any feelings in a box. And a lot of the last several years of my life had been about getting in touch with anger, both earlier in my life, my inner child, but also on a 1 to 10 spectrum, where 1 is there's a little friction and 10 is burn the place down, I'm out of here. My pain tolerance is very high. As an Ironman athlete, I have a relationship with pain, but in other ways too high, right? That I would, until something was a 9.5 out of 10, I'd be like, maybe this isn't good for me. And I'm upset. And then at 10, I'm like, I'm out of here. It's burned in place to the ground, And the good part of that is that I rarely ever got really angry, right? People's experience of me was really quite passionate and calm. The downside is that nobody had any signal. Like when I would actually tip over that edge, their experience of me was everything was fine until I was out the door, which is not really fair. And so that's that practice of like, how do I feel? Like, what does 2 and 3 on that scale feel like? Can I communicate that to myself and others earlier?
Yeah.
And giving myself permission that displeasure and anger and pain are not a binary. They're not either it's great or burn the place to the ground, but there's a spectrum and to allow myself to feel through that.
Yeah. Wow. So many things that we repress and being human, it's so big. There's so much to it. Well, thank you so much, Justin, for your time, for your stories, for your vulnerability. I really appreciate it and enjoyed this conversation with you. It's been a pleasure.
You're so welcome. It's so good to reconnect with you, Nadja. And Colin, so lovely to meet you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the chance to connect with you both.
Thank you so much for tuning into the Wake Up Protocol. If you like what you heard, share this episode with 3 people who need to hear this message. And if you want to go deeper, head to thewakeuprotocol.com and sign up for our email list. That's where we share behind the scenes insights, bonus resources, exclusive invites, and the kind of guidance we only send to our community. And if this is the last thing you hear from us, all we'd like to say is keep going, trust yourself, follow your heart. Until next time, have a safe and happy journey.